Welcome to the Economist in Your Ear podcast. When we talk about global technological leadership, our attention usually zeroes in on the immediate conflicts, the battles over mass market EVs, or who's leading the current arms race in generative AI.
Right, the most visible, high-profile fights.
Exactly. But what if the next great tech competition is already being decided in two completely different and maybe unexpected sectors?
Right.
How we move and how we heal.
That's really the crux of this analysis. It points to China's aggressive, systematic advance in autonomous vehicles, specifically robotaxis and in new pharmaceuticals.
And this isn't just about scaling up old tech.
Not at all. It's about China pushing the frontier in two distinct, highly regulated fields.
So our focus today is to explore this claim that China's approach here offers some pretty crucial lessons for the rest of the world, highlighting what the source material calls a powerful, almost systemically engineered innovation formula.
And we really need to move beyond just summarizing the prediction that China will dominate. I think we have to unpack the specific structural factors driving this acceleration. Things like regulatory overhauls and, examine where that narrative might be oversimplifying the reality of global competition.
And then connect the dots for you on what this all means for global markets and maybe most importantly, how Western economies should respond.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this shift. The core claim is based on some staggering progress in two really complex sectors. So let's take robo-taxis first. What defines this rapid advance?
I think the defining factor is cost and speed of deployment. The analysis points out that Chinese companies are already building autonomous taxis for roughly a third of the cost of their big rivals.
A third, so like a Waymo in the United States.
Exactly. That massive cost gap is fundamentally market shaping. And they're not just testing at home. They're racking up millions of kilometers and actively establishing partnerships across the Middle East, parts of Europe.
Positioning themselves to export this capacity globally.
They're already doing it.
And that cost difference, it can't just be about cheap labor, right? It's got to be about industrial capacity.
Absolutely. And that taps right into the first part of this so-called innovation formula, scale. China has built this massive multiplier effect.
How so?
Well, for robotaxis, they piggyback directly on the density of their EV supply chains. When you have the world's largest manufacturing base for electric vehicle batteries, that dense ecosystem drives down the cost of every adjacent component.
So things like the LiDAR units, the sophisticated sensors.
Everything. All the things you need for a self-driving car become cheaper and more available.
That industrial engine is just huge. But what about the other surprising pivot, the pharmaceutical sector? I mean, going from a market known for generic copycats to being a genuine innovator. That seems an almost impossible leap to make so fast.
It is a fundamental role reversal. It really is. China is now the world's second largest developer of new medicines, with a particular strength in oncology, so cancer treatments.
And the proof is in the pudding, so to speak.
The biggest evidence of this shift is that major Western pharma giants are now actively licensing Chinese innovations for global distribution. It's not the other way around anymore.
So if scale is the first part of the formula, what's the second equally crucial piece?
Talent, human capital. And it's not just about the raw numbers, though. China does graduate the world's largest cohorts in science and engineering.
It's about where that talent goes.
It's about the sheer availability of specialized talent ready to jump into these specific frontier fields. And in pharma, the scale of human capital is, well, literal.
You mean patient pools?
Huge, centralized patient pools. This allows companies to run extremely fast and statistically powerful clinical trials. And that dramatically speeds up the entire R&D pipeline.
Which is a huge bottleneck in the West.
A major bottleneck. It can delay drug approval in smaller or more decentralized markets for years.
So we have this huge engine of scale and talent running, but you mentioned a surprising accelerant. What makes their regulatory framework so much more effective than the systems we see in the West?
This is the third and maybe the most transformative element, regulatory agility. And this wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, top-down structural reform.
Right, I remember seeing this. After the political goal was set in 2016 to become a biotechnology superpower, the bureaucracy just mobilized.
Completely. And you should see the numbers on that mobilization because the data is truly astonishing.
Give us the numbers.
Okay, so the national drug regulators' workforce quadrupled.
Quadrupled.
In a very short period, just between 2015 and 2018. That injection of pure capacity allowed them to solve a massive problem. A backlog of 20,000 new drug applications.
20,000. They cleared that entire backlog.
In just 2 years.
Wow. I mean, the administrative delay on that volume alone could just sideline an innovative company. What did that do to the timeline for a specific drug?
It was tectonic. The sources show the time it takes to get approval for human trials shrank from an agonizing 501 days.
Nearly 2 years.
Down to just 87 days.
Less than 3 months.
Think of the velocity that gives you. If you can go from lab bench to clinical trial in under 3 months, you attract the best ideas and the most investment. It's a magnet.
That kind of speed is a total game changer in a field like oncology, where faster data means faster treatments for patients. Why is oncology such a strong focus for them?
Because oncology trials offer clear, measurable outcomes. You can see tumor reduction, you can track survival rates. That makes them ideal for rapid clinical iteration. If you can quickly prove your drug works with a powerful data set, you satisfy investors and regulators much faster.
And we see this nimble approach mirrored in the mobility sector, too.
Absolutely. Instead of years of bureaucratic haggling over liability and, testing parameters, local officials in China who are keen to attract high-tech, investment-approved, rapid pilot programs.
How many are running now?
They're running trials in over 50 cities right now. They're installing the sensors, the digital road infrastructure needed to support these self-driving fleets. They're just experimenting with rules at a pace the West simply hasn't matched.
Which brings up a critical question. The analysis contrasts agile China with the slow West. That seems pretty accurate from the data, but what does this agility really tell us about institutional structure?
I think it highlights a core structural difference. China's ability to coordinate these huge pilot zones and mobilize all levels of government so rapidly is a unique feature of its centralized administrative system.
When a goal is set at the top,
the entire bureaucracy aligns and executes quickly and on a massive scale.
Which is just inherently difficult in Western liberal democracies.
Precisely. Western systems are, by design, constrained by highly fragmented jurisdictions. You often have to get regulatory approval state by state or region by region.
And you have higher procedural requirements.
Yes, things like mandatory public participation, detailed environmental reviews. The point isn't that one system is morally better, just that they are institutionally wired to innovate at very different speeds. China can flip the regulatory switch faster.
While the West prioritizes procedural thoroughness and local input.
Yeah.
Now, let's turn to the competitive environment inside China. The article describes it as cutthroat competition that forges these hyper-competitive export champions. That level of internal friction must have some major consequences.
It acts as a rigorous forge. That intense domestic competition, compounded by deflationary pressures in the wider economy, absolutely results in cost advantages. The companies that survive are incredibly lean. They're forced to innovate at blistering speeds just to stay alive.
But doesn't that speed come at a cost? I mean, in terms of rigor. And doesn't that kind of price compression reduce the money you have for future R&D?
That is the critical double-edged context. You're right. While the dense supply chains and easy trial recruitment drive down the initial costs, excessive price compression eats away at R&D margins for everyone.
So if margins are too thin?
They can't fund the next generation of truly disruptive fundamental research, the kind of research that created the initial breakthroughs in the West. It could lead to a short-term gain in market share, but maybe a long-term innovation lag.
And I imagine some promising smaller firms just get wiped out.
They exit early, which leads to consolidation into fewer but much stronger major players, often with state backing.
So we see this deflationary pressure feeding into low prices, but low cost alone doesn't guarantee global leadership, does it?
Absolutely not. Global leadership requires so much more than just a cost advantage. You need sophisticated global sales networks, deep cross-border data governance expertise, robust IP management.
And in pharma, you have to meet the standards of the FDA and the EMA.
U.S. and European drug regulators, yes. Yeah. And that often requires different clinical trial protocols and data sets than what the Chinese NMPA requires.
These are capabilities that Western firms have spent decades perfecting.
Exactly. And China is building these capacities at speed, but global systems and, frankly, trust take time to mature. This is why framing the whole thing as China will dominate might be premature.
So what's a better way to frame it?
What's fascinating here is that a more precise description is that China is moving from being a technology adopter to a technology shaper.
Adopter to shaper, that's an important distinction.
It is. They're starting to shape the rules, the costs, and the direction of travel for everyone else, particularly in these scalable, cost-sensitive frontier markets.
So how will this scaled, low-cost innovation wash around the world? Do the two sectors, pharma and robotaxis, follow different global paths?
They do, and it's largely because of the politics of data and security. In pharma, the global relationship could actually be quite symbiotic.
How so?
Well, given the sheer size of the U.S. market, it generates something like 70% of global pharma profits. Chinese medicines have to navigate international markets, licensing deals, global clinical trials. They're essential, and their oncology innovations could bring huge benefits, especially to the developing world where affordability is a major barrier.
But robotaxis are a different story. They rely so heavily on data collection, on urban mapping. They must face major headwinds in the West.
That is the consensus, yes. Autonomous vehicles involve continuous data flows, mapping, installing vast sensor infrastructure. Because of those acute national security concerns and the presence of strong domestic industry, they are highly likely to be blocked by the U.S. market.
But not everywhere.
No. They are expected to gain significant footholds in Europe, the Middle East, and developing markets where domestic efforts lag far behind, and, frankly, the cost advantage is too great to ignore.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this trajectory points towards something maybe healthier than a single undisputed global leader, right?
I think it points toward a multipolar innovation structure, which actually increases global resilience. We're seeing different regions specialize.
Okay, so China leads in.
In scaled engineering and applied AI, the heavy lifting of getting low-cost, effective technology widely deployed. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues to lead in foundational research and complex biotech platforms.
The underlying science.
Think of foundation models as the general brain of AI, and applied AI as the specific driving program for a vehicle. And Europe, often slower, could end up leading in setting robust global safety standards and rigorous medical validation.
So the key takeaway for Washington and Brussels isn't to panic or, get into a defensive crouch.
No.
It's a realization that they need to adapt and accelerate their own systems. The article warns pretty strongly against knee-jerk protectionism.
And that's the critical insight. Blocking Chinese innovation entirely, just out of protectionism, deprives consumers globally of cheaper, better drugs and more affordable transport. When your own voters are dealing with cost-of-living crises, denying those benefits can be politically and economically disastrous.
So the answer is not building higher walls, it's more of a self-improvement agenda for the West.
Precisely. The adaptive strategies recommended are all about learning from China's strengths while staying true to Western values. This means Western governments have to dramatically speed up their own approval processes and modernize infrastructure.
And support more risk-taking.
Support risk-taking and experimentation areas where Western regulators often prioritize safety to the point of just stalling essential progress.
And addressing the long-term issue of talent seems vital if the West wants to keep its edge in those foundational areas.
Absolutely. The West risks becoming hostile to the very scientific talent and gifted immigrants that have historically fueled its innovation engines. If the West wants to compete effectively, it has to ensure it's the most attractive destination for the world's best scientists and engineers.
So the core lesson here is unmistakable.
It is. China's combination of scale and regulatory agility is generating real-world systemic advantages, and the West needs to look inward and modernize its own innovation pathways to keep pace.
This analysis confirms that the rise is systemically grounded and very real. While, total dominance isn't predetermined, China's inherent strengths position it as a major innovation hub, particularly where fast iteration and large data sets matter. And that's leading toward a deepening, complex, global interdependence that we really can't ignore.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought. If China's regulatory agility is based on a structural ability to coordinate effort across a massive nation, a characteristic that stems from its unique governing structure, what specific institutional changes could the West make without compromising its core values like public participation and due process to foster the speed and scale required to compete in the next generation of technology?
And that really is the structural challenge facing policymakers now. Thanks for listening. Follow us for daily insights into world affairs, and don't forget to like, comment, and share.